Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider, this week with Alex Selsky. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Alex Selsky, Senior Advisor to MEF's Israel Victory Project and lecturer at Hadassah Academic College, join us this week to update us on all the events going on in Israel. I know I hate when I say that. Mr. Selsky will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes and open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Alex Selsky.
Stacey, thank you very much. And yes, definitely, each time I smile when you say everything that happens in Israel, because, every time before this webinar, the major attempt and challenge is, to pick what is the most important to speak about and to report about. Because in Israel, not every week, every day and every hour, so many things happen, and you have to choose what is the most important, what is the most, what has the biggest effect on Israeli life and, geopolitical, political, economical aspects, and, and to put it all into 15 minutes of presentation, even though another 15 minutes of questions. This is a major challenge. So again, I picked 4 things which I think are the most important things happening in Israel this week that we must follow up. And the first, I will go, from maybe the most geopolitically important event, and we'll go down into domestic politics or aerial and then domestic politics. So I think definitely the biggest news of this week geopolitically for Israel is that the negotiations about the normalization with Saudi Arabia are back. And they're back, with huge surprise, because only a few months ago we spoke here about the agreements between Saudis and Iranians under the umbrella of Chinese. And we all felt that the negotiations over the normalization, fade away and go further and further from us. Some thought about some normalization between Saudis and Iranians, which some thought that might, put under danger even some of the previous peace agreements as part of the Abraham Accords. But very fast, we all understood that these agreements between Saudis and Iranians were, maneuvering between United States and China. And what we saw this week is that Mohammed bin Salman, makes full U-turn back into the American arms, speaking about some very big package of security agreements with the United States and developing a civil nuclear program for Saudis. And as we hear, the United States put on the table as part of the negotiations normalization with Israel, or maybe the whole issue is normalization with Israel. But I think we all understand that the first interest for the United States is not Israel, but the economic normalization between the United States and Saudis over the oil prices and capacities of production. So, and that puts Israel into very, very complex situation, because the conditions that the Saudis demand, from one hand are very appealing, but on, of the very fact of the possible normalization, because that puts, the whole Israeli-Arab conflict, as Netanyahu stated, maybe to end the conflict. And as he said, Palestinians, a few percent, very not influential, definitely today, or not enough influential today on Arabic world. That will put the Israeli-Arab conflict almost at the end, and the Palestinians will understand that they somehow may be defeated in this war. That's Netanyahu's position. But we see that first, the danger of such nuclear program of Saudis is very high, because that's exactly how Iranians started, speaking about civil nuclear program, and look where we're now. And, Ben Salman, exactly as we saw this week, can make very fast U-turns from one position to another, geopolitically, economically, and maybe militarily as well. And he demands concessions to Palestinians. What does it mean? Now, we all understand that he maybe doesn't really care for Palestinians, and he's one of the biggest critics of Palestinians. But again, what does he mean, and what will satisfy him? And are those prices not high enough? Now, there are people in Israel who say Netanyahu in today's position will run after this deal because it will bring him huge benefits politically, locally, and that can be a danger because the prices are too high. So in Israel, there is a very, very big discussion over this week. Israeli position is not clear. Once we hear Netanyahu says we're not part of the negotiations, we are just updated and we didn't even express our opinion. Other day, we hear that the head of the Mossad, Dudi Barnea, visited the White House. I think we all can assume that if Mossad had visited White House, he definitely does that not only to listen, but somehow to communicate opinions. And we also know that this is continuation of previous circles of negotiations. So we understand that the process is very secret, but we might think and understand that Israel is active. So this is the first, I think, very, very big issue. I will run because we, again, don't have much time to go deep. The second thing I think that we must mention is that the Knesset goes to a recess a few days ago. And by definition, the whole argument, the whole fight over the legislation goes down just because of a very simple fact that no legislation, no Knesset until the middle of October. So everything somehow comes down. But the Israeli Supreme Court announced that it will hear it will discuss the reasonableness clause cancellation on September 12th with all the 15 judges, first time ever hearing this issue. And first of all, it's a very, very big event for the dramatic event, the very fact that all the judges will discuss it. And the second thing, what will happen if the Supreme Court will cancel? Will it be so so active and so brave to cancel this legislation, understanding that actually the very legislation is against the activism of the court? And if so, how the Israeli government and the Knesset and the coalition will react to that, and if the reaction will be, not abiding. And Netanyahu didn't answer actually to questions if he will abide to decision of the court in this matter, and if so, what will be again the reaction. And we hear the opposition saying that we all are waiting for this discussion of the High Court, and then we will see if we renew the protests. So at the moment, we're in a kind of a ceasefire in this issue. I think definitely until this hearing on September 12th, which will be very dramatic, and enjoy the quiet. I feel it personally, physically, because I live in Jerusalem, very close to Knesset, and I just feel that from the day that the legislation passed, we just don't hear the noise. Before that, we felt like we're living, in times of October Revolution in Russian Empire. I'm laughing, yeah. But let's see. I think the next test of all this issue is definitely this hearing. And the last thing, which I think is also very dramatic for these days, is the tension in the northern border with Hezbollah. Now, it all is connected because we see after the legislation passed of a cancellation of the reasonableness clause, we see that more reserve soldiers and officers claim that they will not volunteer to army, to the reserve service. We see that some doctors speak about immigration. We see that there are, again and again, a conversation about Israeli startups who don't receive investments as before. On the other hand, by the way, we don't see very big change in shekel in the markets. So the economy, doesn't feel some huge crisis, I think. I think that we can see that, in Hebrew, we say the sky didn't fall after the legislation. The economy goes further and the shekel, is stable, but it might be stable because, in the US, we have a very sensitive and not stable situation because, we all speak about the fact that Israeli credit ranking can be lowered, but at the moment, the credit ranking which is lowered is the American one. So maybe that causes the stability of shekel toward the dollar because the dollar is not stable. Anyway, so in all this background, we see that Hezbollah, definitely under Iranian leadership and backing, continues to provoke Israel almost every day. This week, again, we saw provocation next to the Ajar. There is a village, Ajar village, which the only Alawite village in Israel with the border of Lebanon. Half of it is in Israel and half of it is in Lebanon. And next to it, close to it, there is another very sensitive point called Mount Dov, which was actually the last Israeli base that was left when Israel withdrew from Lebanon. So these 2 points all the times are challenged and provoked by Hezbollah. Israel doesn't react, trying to solve all these tensions diplomatically and legally, showing to the United Nations in UNIFIL that this is a very, very open that they openly opposed to the international law, and we hope that it will be solved legally, and the security that the UN will demand from Lebanon, from Lebanese government to demand from Hezbollah or directly from Hezbollah, to stop. At the moment, the problem is that in Lebanon there is no order, no government, no no stable government, and Hezbollah definitely uses this opportunity of vacuum within Lebanon, and definitely Iran uses this vacuum against Israel. Israel cannot afford these days, with all the situation with Israel, to have another war now. But everybody speaks about the fact, and I will finish by that, that everybody speaks about the fact that military next military conflict with Lebanon is just a matter of time. How big it will be, how hard it will be, if Gaza will join, if Judea and Samaria will join, if we will see more Iranian pressure, and we will have multi-front war. It's a very good question, very relevant one. We, the Israel Victory Project, just had a briefing in the Knesset on this issue, how we win the next multi-front war. And I think all the opinions speak about the fact that it's only a matter of time. So these are my major issues I wanted to brief on, and let's open it for questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So the first one is from Eric asking, Abbas was recently in Egypt meeting with Hamas on reunification. Can you please explain why this is happening again? And do you think it can succeed, and will it affect Israel?
It's a very good question. The thing is that I think every year or 2 or 3, I cannot count, they try to do that, and to unify. I don't think that it will succeed from, I think the reason is very simple. Abbas's days, Abbas is 80, 5, 6. His days are over very, very soon. And everybody speaks about the fact that Hamas tries to, strengthen itself in Judea and Samaria to be able to control Judea and Samaria, the Palestinian Authority, to replace or to take advantage and to conquer, to occupy. We don't know, maybe by force, maybe politically, they did it already in Gaza. They definitely can do that in Palestinian Authority. So I don't see that Hamas have the need to have peace agreement. I see that definitely Abbas wants it. I don't think that Hamas needs it, because Hamas understands that Abbas is very weak, PA is very weak. I don't see chance for that, but let them try to do it every 2 years. It's okay, the hotels in Egypt are very nice.
All right, thank you. Carrie Hillebrand asked, do you see a realistic chance that Gantz and possibly Lapid will enter the coalition in place of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich?
If you paid attention, I even didn't include that issue into my 15 minutes talks, even though it could sound very dramatic, because there were talks about it. I don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening for many reasons. Some claim that maybe if the possibility of the agreement with the Saudis over the normalization is really happening, and if the right wing within the coalition will be against because of the concessions to Palestinians, maybe the solution is the government of unity, and then it also will solve all the tensions over the judicial reform. Nice try, wishful thinking. I don't see it's coming. Definitely not before. Definitely everybody's waiting, as I said, for the hearing of the Supreme Court, and then for the continuation of the legislation, yes or no, after the Knesset is going back, if the talks with Saudis are serious. But as I said before, the challenges are so big, so far, I think it's not serious.
All right, thank you. So speaking of the normalization process, Eric asks, why do you think what do you think the U.S. will ask of Israel for setting up recognition between Israel and Saudi Arabia?
Well, as I said, we see that, this, what we hear, we don't know what is real. We can, we can relate to what we hear. We hear that Saudis demand concessions for Palestinians. What does it mean? What concessions? How big? How serious? I don't know. This issue is much more. There is more secrecy than revealed details. I don't know. What US will demand from Israel. Well, so far we see that the Biden administration, Biden himself, almost demand from Israel, political consolidation and cooperation over the judicial reform. By the way, you all maybe heard that Netanyahu gave an interview to Fox News saying that, every world leader has opinion over Israel, but I don't say anything about, democracy in France and the tensions in France, which are much, much, much more violent than in Israel. So I think that, people in the States, definitely in the Democratic Party, may answer to Netanyahu that, we remember when you interfered in our politics. But again, I don't know. I think that we should all wait until the visit of Netanyahu to the White House. We will know more. And I think that, again, at the moment, I think there is much more information classified than revealed. And I don't know how serious we can relate to the information we receive, because I think we receive either very low or false information for many reasons.
Absolutely. Nancy Zucker asks, why was the Supreme Court changed in the 90s if it was a parliamentary form to begin with?
It's a very long legal lecture. Why? Many changes. First of all, first of all, in the 90s, it was a more left government, which was much more liberal. And then we had a court, and the head of the courts, the very known name today, the head of the Supreme Court, Aaron Barak, which said that, everything can be discussed in the court, and court can judge everything. And he is, the spiritual father of, judicial activism in Israeli high courts. And but then we had, row of new laws, very liberal, very, speaking about the personal freedoms, the basic laws, in Israel. As you may know, in Israel, we don't have constitution, we have basic laws. So in 93, if I recall well, two very major basic laws of freedom of personal rights were legislated, and it was part of kind of a way of, very liberal legislation. And the court, I think, took some on this wave. Again, I'm trying to, to summarize it in a few questions, to make, to try to make a very big shift to what then was left. And today, when the right government is already many years in back, they try to, they try to fight this, okay, or some will say, to balance this, and the court doesn't let. Now, some will ask, but why now, right? Netanyahu is back in 2009. If this is so important, why he didn't do it then? What changed. And some people will say, well, the only thing that changed is his personal trials. So apparently, and that's why we don't trust him, is that he doesn't do it ideologically. He does it because of his personal trials and situation. And this is exactly in the midst of the tensions and the so-called, divide in the Israeli society. I think, after all, I think the majority of people in Israel understand that the reform, so-called, is needed. But just those who are against the reform, they don't trust Netanyahu, his motives, and that he will stop here. And by the way, this week we already see that, governments and different partners within the coalition already, they how we say in Israel, they warm up the engines, and the appetites are skyrocketing for more and more. We already see some personal legislations which, without the reasonableness cause, will be much harder to cancel. So people say, exactly, you see, that's exactly what we were speaking about. They do it, slicing, slice by slice, slice by slice. And they don't trust Netanyahu. They don't trust the ultra-Orthodox who want, also to make big shifts toward them. And already this week we saw, legislation projects that will, for example, put learning Torah in yeshiva equal to army service. And many Israel said, this is unacceptable. But again, I'm saying, let's not charge statements. When the legislation will really go, when I served as Netanyahu's advisor, I remember him on some discussions saying, the only thing that after all matters is, the finger and the Knesset, not the declarations before. So let's see if it will move. If it will move, definitely all the tensions will definitely be back.
Thank you so much for summarizing that so eloquently. So EP Burke asked, do you see the government taking additional measures to provide tighter security against the continuous drumbeat of terror attacks, especially on motorists in the Jordan Valley?
Some will say that, Israel all the time fights the terrorists, and these terror attacks, are part of life. But some will say that, that the government was too busy with the judicial reform and didn't invest its time enough in the security. And we see that in the terror attacks and in tensions I spoke about before with Lebanon. I think that both claims and statements are right. I think government should and must put aside everything, get back to security issues, because if the security will not be treated, everything will not be relevant. That's, by the way, exactly the message that we delivered in our Knesset conference briefing we had 2 weeks ago. Guys, put everything aside. The judicial reform is very important. And, as again, Netanyahu once said, life is before standard of life, okay? Living is before standard of living. If we don't deal with security, there is no living. So standard of living, or quality of living must be second. And Israel must, put everything aside and do something to bring back the unity within IDF, to bring back the readiness, full readiness of IDF, to put back the deterrence toward all the enemies, all the terror organizations. Unless it will be, we will be very, very challenged.
Thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Alex, thank you so much for taking time to update us this week.
Thank you.
Of course. For our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Rob Satloff discussing the normalization of Saudi-Israeli relations. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.